Exactly. Thank
doodads
you.
and stuff.
Thank you for sweeping in to help me. No, obviously, if you find you're really enjoying your podcast and you feel like, okay, I've gotten my bearings, it's time to upgrade. Yeah, you can learn about mixing audio and you can learn what, all the different podcast hosts offer over each other that's unique. And there's a lot. There is admittedly a lot. But for most podcasters, just getting a podcast made and released on a cadence of some kind is like more important than anything.
Exactly. And there is, kind of in the podcasting world, everybody knows about like the rule of 10. Like if you publish more than 10 episodes, you are probably in the top like 2% or something crazy of podcasters officially. So getting there and just like staying with it, learning and growing as you go, that's a huge milestone and accomplishment in and of itself.
Yeah. And it applies to most types of content creation. Like this isn't just a podcasting thing. Most people who have tried to make a YouTube channel burn out after like 5 or 6 videos. Or most people who try to like write a book burn out after 5 or 6 chapters. I'm really fixated on 5 and 6 as numbers today. Most people who run triathlons give up after 5 or 6 minutes. The works.
Oh, yeah.
that might be me telling on myself. I don't know.
As a runner, that mile 5, that mile 6, it does hurt you a little bit.
I said minutes, but thanks for the humble brag there.
Well, I'll tout myself.
Okay. You were just talking about how you run 1-minute miles. That's all. In 5 or 6 minutes, you've run 5 or 6 miles, exactly. Alyssa, clearly.
Exactly.
That's faster than a cheetah, but whatever, moving on.
Podcasting. So, yeah, I think, you figure out your hardware, figure out your software, however you're going to make this thing, all the things like that. Now you're kind of in that third step, maybe, that you stop pressing record and now you're like, whoo, I've got it. I need to do all these things with it. My favorite part, the post-publish phase. So this is things where you're going to think about like, oh, I have a podcast. I probably want to talk about it and let people know that I have a podcast. So you're going to need to create some form of content, probably track stuff. So traditional, podcasting metrics, they're going to be those downloads, actual how many people are listening to your show, how many people are following the show. Again, nothing insane. Your host should probably have an entire dashboard when you first log in telling you all these things. So it'll take like 5 seconds for you to very quickly figure out like, okay, this is how we're doing this week. This is how we're growing. All those lovely things. If they don't, you can get a little bit more platform specific. Spotify for creators, Apple Podcasts. If you're doing a YouTube podcast, YouTube Studio has all of this stuff really easy to find. Lots of Google it, lots of help articles to help you figure that out. And then you also want to create some sort of like a feedback loop and just kind of go from there.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think one thing worth remembering is just like in the process of releasing your podcast and starting to promote it and what have you, don't get discouraged by less than stellar results. That's just a sign that maybe your podcast hasn't found its audience yet. And maybe you need to work on SEO, or maybe if listenership doesn't carry over from episode to episode, something in the format needs to be tweaked. As long as you're putting stuff out somewhat consistently, you're able to like dynamically change what you do. That's the great thing about podcasting. And likewise, if you find like, okay, I launched my podcast and it's audio only, but it's not really doing that well, maybe shifting and trying video once or twice might help. And if you find that it's too much for you, it's trying to figure out, okay, what else can I do? Speaking of video, in the whole production side of things, we were talking, and I didn't actually mention it. So really quickly, you can make a video podcast with whatever you have. You don't need to go out and buy cameras. You can do it on Zoom. Actually, most podcasts that are video probably do it through Zoom or something, and not just like hobbyist podcasts. We're talking about like huge ones like Jon Stewart of The Daily Show has a podcast. Every episode of it is recorded on Zoom, if I'm not mistaken, or something like that, a Skype or some kind of a video conferencing app. So you keep at it. You take the feedback from your podcast being out there and you build off of it. And don't worry about the equipment, because the equipment isn't important. What's important is just like making sure you're putting something out of value to people.
Exactly. And I mean, people, they're always going to value quality over like quantity and flashiness and stuff like that. So
Sure.
I think there's a statistic, and I'm probably making this number up, but I know it's high. It's in the 80s or it's in the 90s. So I'm going to go 86%. Yeah. So 86% of people, they really do value a good story over high quality production.
Mm-hmm.
So again, going back to that equipment, you don't need to go out and drop hundreds of dollars. If you've got technology in your home, you can probably use that to go ahead and make that podcast and get it out, tell the people, send a tweet or an X. I don't know what it's really called anymore. Blue Sky, Thread. I don't know. That
Carrier
stuff.
pigeon,
I mean, that would definitely be a different way of doing it. If you have a niche about birds and bird delivery, that'd be great. Carrier pigeons.
Yeah, exactly. I think it exactly is that. It's just, you just got to get the word out however you feel comfortable doing it, and not like, don't worry yourself into a hole over whether or not it's the greatest thing ever made. Just something being out and something being entertaining and good enough and informative. That's what matters at the end of the day.
I think if there's anything that people can take away from this episode, it's definitely going to be staying consistent and being flexible. It'll change. That's fine. You're going to learn and you're going to grow with it.
For sure. And I think one of the things, maybe you've heard this before, is like, it's not about getting a lot of listeners with podcasting. It's more about getting like the higher quality listeners specifically, just like how your content itself is more about quality over quantity. It's better to have 10 hyper engaged, plugged in listeners than 100 who like only kind of listen to your podcast for a few minutes every week. You really do want the people who are going to tweet back at you or retweet your episodes when you post them and stuff like that, because those are the people who will help get word of mouth going for your show.
Exactly. I mean, engagement is everything. Podcasting, it is a sense of community. Like you said, it's a conversation piece. So you're starting that conversation. You're hoping that other people are going to engage back and, talk to you. So that's going to be kind of just one of those things with podcasting. Just don't get discouraged. Keep with it. Ask people for feedback if you're like, this isn't doing exactly how I thought it would do. You still probably have some amount of listenership. So just literally ask people like, hey, if there's anything you want to see, email me, DM me, that kind of stuff. And you'd be really surprised, especially for the people that are invested. They probably have one or two pieces of feedback to say like, hey, I would love to see this, or I would love to hear you talk about this, that kind of stuff. So engagement really does go a long way in podcasting and content creation overall, but podcasting very specifically.
Yeah. And obviously, don't just engage with your listeners, engage with other creators. I think part of like this episode might have felt vague is like we were talking about like it's really just about doing a podcast. And it is, because like you need to build the habit and get into it. But once you've built that habit, the next place you could and probably should go is to podcasting communities. Go to, our Discord, for example, not to plug us. We probably give tips on how you can promote your podcast there and stuff like that. Likewise, go on to like the podcasting subreddits for like tips on, hey, I've been recording my podcast for a couple of weeks with my phone. I'm looking for like an introductory laptop that can handle light recording and editing. The best part about podcasting, or one of the best parts, is the fact that the community is like super inviting, and there's like little to no pretension in it. So you can literally just be like, I don't know how to use computers, but I want to produce the next like This American Life or something. And people will be like, all right, word, dude, this is what you need. And this is how you do it. And you will need a computer, but you'll figure it out.
YouTube's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, YouTube's great too. You can just like look all of this stuff up. There are a lot of creators who like almost do like vlog series on their podcast. So it's like, today I upgraded my mic and this is me testing it. And you can just learn this stuff in a really approachable, fun way.
You can listen to this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. In between bouts of me just spewing absolute word salad, there's probably a helpful nugget there. For Melissa, let's be honest.
Well, I am pretty funny. Was that the keyword that we said? Pretty funny earlier?
Something like that.
Pretty funny podcast. There we go.
Pretty funny podcast with your pretty funny friends.
Exactly.
Well, Alyssa, is there anything else like a burgeoning podcaster should know?